How Dante Exum failed in the NBA. Dante went from a young player with a ton of potential to eventually a player that just never really materialized to his expectations. But quickly before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports, I make opinionative NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention that I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. Dante Exum was drafted with the number 5 overall selection all the way back in the 2014 NBA draft. And originally when Dante was drafted, he was seen as somewhat of a project, but at the same time, he was seen as a young prospect that had all the potential in the world. He had all the physical gifts that you would ever need. He had a great frame for that point guard / shooting guard position, he had great length, he had great athleticism, and overall at the time that Dante was drafted, there was a ton of different things to be excited about. But in Dante's rookie season, he didn't necessarily have the best rookie year, only averaging 4.8 points per game on 34% shooting from the field, 1.6 rebounds, and 2.4 assists. Now obviously those numbers are not really all that good whatsoever, especially for a player who's a top 5 overall selection, but at the same time this was somewhat expected due to the fact that people did see Dante as somewhat of a project going forward long term, and the fact that Dante did show certain flashes offensively at times, and he also played relatively good defense overall, was definitely something to be encouraged by. And the 2 seasons following that, Dante definitely made some improvements that showed up in terms of his statistics, but also just watching him out there on the court, he definitely did look a little better. In the 2016 season, he averaged 6.2 points per game on 42% shooting from the field, 2 rebounds, and 1.7 assists. In the 2017 season, he bumped his numbers up to 8.1 points per game on 48% shooting from the field, 1.9 rebounds, and 3.1 assists. And although the increase in numbers weren't necessarily huge jumps, it was at the same time nice to see that he was improving his game somewhat year after year. But at the same time, obviously it was getting somewhat concerning after 3 or 4 seasons that your top 5 selection still wasn't necessarily playing all that well, and still obviously wasn't a starting level talent. Now one thing that I will say, Dante was definitely playing a pretty high level of NBA defense, which was definitely great to see, but that was probably one of the only things that he was truly living up to expectations based upon his draft day expectations thus far. But of course, as I mentioned before, he was seen as somewhat of a project, so the Jazz were being somewhat patient with him. But unfortunately for Dante and the Jazz, his 2017 season ended up being his best statistical season, but at that point and a couple seasons after, it became pretty clear that a common theme was starting to mount, and that was injuries. Dante missed the entire 2015 season due to injuries, a decent portion of the 2016 season, almost the entire 2017 season, once again a decent portion of the 2018 season, and overall it was just becoming pretty clear that this guy was dealing with a ton of different injuries. And injuries are certainly a huge factor in why certain players don't necessarily fully live up to their expectations, but in my opinion it was especially true in the case of Dante Exum, because there definitely were certain times where Dante would play pretty good basketball on the court for certain stretches, but it seemed like whenever he started to figure things out, he would get hurt, and that would push him back. And when you're consistently getting hurt that early on into your NBA career, especially before you even proved yourself, that's going to hurt you for a couple different reasons. The first is you're probably going to lose confidence within yourself, because as I mentioned, up until that point, Dante didn't necessarily fully prove himself to not only the fans, but also to himself personally. So for him, it might have felt like whenever he started to figure things out, he would just get hurt. And you're probably going to lose a certain amount of confidence due to that in terms of your overall game, but at the same time, you might also lose some confidence in your physical body, because Dante went through some pretty significant injuries, and once you come back from those injuries, you might not necessarily feel as confident doing the same sort of things that you did pre-injury, post-injury, even if you were fully healthy. And we see this in a lot of different players, but whenever they go through some significant injuries, especially to the knees or to the legs, that next season you might see that player not as willing to drive all the way to the basket and not be as willing to dunk dunk over players or finish around them with crafty layups because they're scared of re-injuring that knee again or whatever injury they had. And to truly feel comfortable on that leg or whatever injury that you did have, it's probably going to take at least 2 seasons. But the fact that Dante was consistently getting hurt and he didn't really have a full season where he was healthy, it definitely had a huge effect on him. And from the 2018 season on, it became pretty clear that Dante Exum would be seen as a draft bust, and after that season, his numbers just consistently went down due to injuries, poor play, and overall just not getting as much of an opportunity like he did earlier on in his career. And during the 2019 season, the Utah Jazz finally gave up on Dante Exum, moving him to the Cleveland Cavaliers. And at that point, the Cavs were just taking a flyer on Dante to see if he could have more success in a different situation, because even though he was seen as a draft bust in Utah, it didn't necessarily mean he couldn't play well in Cleveland, because he definitely did have a lot of skills in my opinion. But probably his biggest calling card in the NBA thus far was defense, and of course every team always needs more defense, so there was always going to be a place for Dante in the NBA, assuming he could stay healthy and could continue to play good defense. And in Cleveland, I would say he definitely once again had some pretty good stretches, but overall he was just a bench player at best. He was definitely playing pretty good defense, he definitely had an ability offensively certain times, but overall the same issues that he was facing in Utah were popping up once again in Cleveland, like the injury issues, the lack of improvement offensively, and overall it was just a struggle for Dante to ever really get it going. And I feel like that's really the story of his career and why he really failed in the NBA. The injuries really held him back and he could just never really get his NBA career going. And after only playing 6 games during the 2020 season with the Cleveland Cavaliers, that ended up being the last time he played in the NBA. Now, do I think Dante's NBA career is over at this point and he's never going to make it back to the NBA? Well, at this point, I definitely think he could make it back based upon his talent level, but at the same time, if he was serious about making it back to the NBA, there's a couple different things that he needs to focus on, and probably the main and most important thing would be injuries. Now, obviously, freak injuries are a thing, and you can't necessarily prevent all these injuries from happening, but at the same time, there are certain things that you can do to help prevent some of these smaller injuries from continuously popping up. And if Dante could do some of those things to really help his body, and if he could play a full season overseas, healthy for the most part, I think that would have a huge benefit on not only his own personal confidence, but it would also definitely help him make it back to the NBA if he was serious about doing so. But also, I think playing overseas and playing at somewhat of a lower level basketball, but of course not at a terrible level, just lower than the NBA level, could certainly boost Dante's confidence. And as I mentioned in a lot of my videos, confidence is a very, very important thing. And if a player as talented as Dante could gain his confidence back, I definitely think he could easily make it back to the NBA and be a bench player for a team for years to come. Because as I mentioned before in the video, defense is always needed in the NBA, so I definitely think a player like Dante, if he could stay healthy for the most part, would always have a place in the league, assuming he would have somewhat of an offensive game as well. And that's been the story of how Dante Exum failed in the NBA. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Why do you think Dante Exum failed in your opinion? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy it, check one of these 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.